Hello. For tonight's Grizzly Tale, I'm going to read you a story from More Grizzly Tales for Gruesome Kids. These are cautionary tales that I wrote for lovers of squeam. Tonight's story is called The Urban Fox. Once upon a time, in a busy inner city not a million miles away from where you are sitting now, there lived a fox. His name was Elvis. Elvis had been born and bred in the city. He had never ever seen the countryside and had never killed a lamb or eaten a fresh chicken in his life. He lived quite comfortably in a semi-detached den that he dug underneath a garden shed. The shed belonged to Mr. and Mrs. Smith, an elderly couple with a small snuffly daughter called Parker. Parker and Elvis were firm friends and liked nothing more of an evening than to sit on the pavement in the rush hour and watch the sun go down through the purple haze of exhaust fumes. Elvis loved the city. He was thrilled by the noise and excitement and eating his food out of a cardboard box. He was a fast food junkie and would spend his nights hunting for takeaways in local dustbins. He was a thoroughly urban fox who never once pined for the fresh air and open fields that lay beyond the gasworks. One day, a new couple moved into the street. They were obviously rich because 5 removal lorries blocked the street while their furniture was unpacked. They drove a huge black Jeep with a sticker in the window that said, "Hunters do it on horseback." And they went by the names of Lord Percy Blunderbus and Lady Davinia. He had a face like a tomato, all round and red with a green hat on top that looked like a stalk. She had wild, wispy hair that sat on her head like a large twist of blue candy floss, and a loud, piercing voice like a foghorn. Elvis and Parker watched the unpacking of the lorries from the safety of the front porch. They had never seen so much furniture in their lives. Apart from the usual wardrobes, chests of drawers and Van Goghs, there were 5 gun racks, several tack boxes, and a large metal case marked "Death Traps. Open with extreme care." "Oh, what do you think they want those for?" asked Parker. "Don't ask," gulped Elvis, catching his breath suddenly. "Look over there." He pointed to the last lorry, which had just rolled up its rear shutter to reveal 6 shiny horses and a pack of beagles. "What do they want those for?" he cried. The 2 friends could only wonder. All was revealed at breakfast the following morning, when Mr. and Mrs. Smith received a visit from Lord and Lady Blunderbus. "Hello!" boomed the Lord on the doorstep. "Pleased to make your acquaintance and all that. What? New in the area, just getting to know the natives, check out the lie of the land. This is the little wife, by the way." "Hello!" screeched Lady Davinia. "Charmed, I'm sure." Thing is," continued Lord Percy, screwing a monocle into his eye, "got to sort out the old sporting business now, what? Wondered if you could assist." "Well, we're not really sporty people," said Mr. Smith. "Well, unless you count bingo," added Mrs. Smith meekly. "Bingo!" shrieked Lady Davinia. "Oh, God, how common! No, not our sort of thing at all. Is there a stag hunting club round here?" The Smiths shook their heads. "Or pheasant shooting?" They shook them again. "Or bear baiting?" At the third shake, Lord Percy looked rather disappointed. "Oh, you silly old trout!" he snapped at his wife. "I told you we should never have moved to the city. They don't understand that for a sport to be a real sport, there's got to be killing. Still, No point in crying over non-spilled blood. What? Going to make the best of a bad job and all that? Socks up! Have you got servants? Lady Davinia asked suddenly. No, said Mrs. Smith. Yes, thought not. This house is filthy. Smells worse than a horse's stable. Still, can't be helped, added Lord Percy. You're probably rather poor, aren't you? Mind if we take a look around? He didn't wait for an answer. The pot-bellied lord and his horse-faced wife simply pushed their way through the hall and disappeared into the kitchen. Now, it was not unusual for Elvis to join the Smiths for breakfast. Mr. Smith couldn't eat crusts on account of him having no teeth, and Elvis loved crusts, especially if Mrs. Smith dabbed them first with fish paste. So imagine the surprise on the new neighbours' faces when they barged into the kitchen and saw a small girl and a red animal sitting at table with stripy napkins tied around their necks. "Gadzooks!" shrieked the lord. "It's a fox!" "Vermin!" shrieked the lady. "Lock up your slaughters! I mean daughters! I mean sheep!" Lord Percy grabbed Mr. Smith by the arm and pulled him into a corner. "I say, sir," he whispered gruffly, "dashed rum do here. What? Did you know you've got a wild scavenging fox scoffing your marmalade?" That's Elvis," said Mr. Smith. "I don't care if it's the big bopper and the blue notes. It's got to go. No places for foxes in a civilised society. Not clean, you see." "What do you mean, got to go?" said Parker. "He's my pet." "Was," interrupted Lord Percy. "Was your pet, princess. Leave it to the lady wife and I. We know what to do." He tapped the side of his nose like a spy giving a secret signal. "What are you going to do?" shouted Mrs. Smith as the Blunderbusses shot out into the street. "Tally-ho!" came the distant cry from the pavement. "Frock up!" It was half an hour later when the bugle sounded. The Smiths went to the kitchen window and looked out across the small city gardens. Mrs. Smith gasped at what she saw. Lord and Lady Blunderbus had saddled up 2 horses. They were sitting astride them wearing bright red coats and long black boots. Lord Percy was drinking brandy from a hip flask and slapping his thigh with a whip. Now, bear in mind that this would have been a normal sight in the country, but in the city, in a 12-metre garden surrounded by a brick wall, it was an extraordinary sight. It was made all the more bizarre by the pack of hounds that was milling around the horses' hooves, yowling and yapping in anticipation of a feeding frenzy. "They're going fox hunting!" exclaimed Mr. Smith. "I don't believe it!" Mrs. Smith shook her head and tutted her disapproval. "These country folk," she said sadly, "they've got no idea. There's not enough space for horses and hounds in our little black gardens." "I expect they'll jump over the fences," said Mr. Smith. "There'll be trouble if they trample my begonias," warned Mrs. Smith. "I shan't stand for it." Just then Elvis padded over and joined them at the window. "Oh, listen to me," she apologised. "Here's me going on about my flowers, and it's you they're hunting to death." She rubbed the fox's ears. "What are we going to do to save you?" "Well, don't worry about Elvis," said Parker, hugging her best friend's neck. "Those are country hounds, and this is a city fox. They'll never catch him. He's far too streetwise." Parker winked at Elvis, and Elvis winked back. Then the urban fox flicked his bushy red tail and shot out through the cat flap to meet the hounds head on. 4 gardens down, the bugle sounded for a second time. The hounds howled like the devil was in them. The horses whinnied and reared up on their back legs. Lady Davinia shouted, "Whoa!" and Lord Percy cried, "Tally-ho!" The ground shook as the hunt moved off. The beagles poured over the first garden fence like a spotted brown waterfall, followed by the large horses, whose heavy hooves skidded across the neatly trimmed lawn and tore up the grass. Foxes are the most cunning creatures on earth, and Elvis was no exception. The gardens were too small for him to run away and hide, so his plan was to make himself invisible by blending in with city life, in the hope that the hounds would run straight past him. In the first garden he found a piece of old string which he tied onto a stick. Then he stood like a statue next to a family of gnomes who were fishing in the goldfish pond. The hunt steamed by without so much as a second glance. "They've got the fox's scent," bellowed Lord Percy, foaming slightly at the mouth. In the second garden Elvis slipped on a bikini, a pair of dark glasses and a sun hat, and lay on a lounger by the swimming pool with a good book and a fruit cocktail. "Hello!" waved Lady Davinia as she galloped past. "Lovely day for it." In the third garden Elvis outshone himself. He curled himself into a circle by clutching his tail between his teeth, hung onto a brick wall, and pretended to be a satellite dish. The dogs stopped and sniffed and whined and barked, but they couldn't see him. "Onward!" bellowed Lord Percy. By now the hunt had left a trail of destruction behind it that stretched as far as the eye could see. Fences were knocked down, flower beds were flattened, children's climbing frames were twisted out of all recognition. There was a punctured paddling pool, a cracked patio, a bent barbecue, and one unlucky potting shed that had collapsed under the weight of Lady Blunderbus and her leaping horse. The fourth garden belonged to a family with children. It was full of games, table tennis, croquet, miniature golf, and a half-size football goal. Elvis thought about disguising himself as a tennis ball, but decided he was too big. He thought about disguising himself as a golf club, but couldn't work out where to hide his tail. He even thought about disguising himself as a penalty spot, but he couldn't make himself flat enough. In the end, he disguised himself as a croquet hoop, and did such a good job that the dogs ran right underneath him. "Blast that fox! Where is it?" thundered Lord Percy in his fury. In the fifth garden the cunning urban fox pretended to be a burglar, and the hunt sailed by as if a burglar was the most normal sight in the world. "I'm getting rather tired," complained Lady Davinia. In the sixth garden Elvis disguised himself as a bird bath. In the seventh, as a crunchy munchy machine for chewing up weeds and leaves. In the eighth, as a shopping trolley. In the ninth, as a wheelbarrow. And in the 10th and final garden, as a rotating washing line, which fooled the hunt completely. By now, Lady Davinia was too exhausted to carry on, and her husband was panting like a hot dog on a summer's day. The hounds had collapsed inside a greenhouse, their pink tongues drooling over the tomato plants, and the horses had sat down and were refusing to jump any more fences. Elvis had beaten the hunt, and Lord and Lady Blunderbus were furious. "Dash city gardens!" blasted the Lord. "We'd have caught that scoundrel in the country." "Hear, hear!" agreed his lady wife. "I don't like the city at all. Too small, too many places for Foxy to hide. I want to go home, Percy." "Oh, me too, old girl. Back to the country where there's space to kill whatever we please." And with that the snotty new neighbours trotted back to their house, packed up their belongings, and drove away. Elvis was a hero. Mr. and Mrs. Smith threw a huge party to celebrate the Lord and Lady's departure, and all the neighbours were invited. They raised their glasses to the cunning urban fox and congratulated him for ridding the street of country vermin. "They deserve to be run out of town," said Parker. "You taught them a lesson, Elvis. Nobody can come into our little city and destroy our gardens." And while everybody cheered, Elvis blushed redder than his bushy tail. A few weeks later, Lord and Lady Blunderbus received a letter from the police. It informed them that they were wanted in connection with a large number of unpaid bills for damage caused by their reckless city fox hunt. They fled to Scotland, where they're still being hunted now.